I spent the better part of a year doing some embedded coaching at Toyota. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit today about an experience we had with their manufacturing facility, which happened to be the second in a large number of waves that we ended up coaching and training. We had already coached some folks and launched 50 to 60 people in California. This was our second wave in Kentucky. So we learned some lessons from California, the first of which is we needed an executive action team that was up and running in order to get rid of the impediments that we were going to surface. And this is what we immediately heard from the executive action team. Nobody's bringing us any impediments. So we wanted to take a quick look at that because that was a pretty important consideration. And what we found was that we were blocked primarily by a cultural fear to speak up. Most of their Scrum Masters and developers were contract staff. They were not full-time employees for the mothership, Toyota. Therefore, they were somewhat disincentivized to say, hey, you guys are doing it wrong, we need help. It became a real cultural issue. In some cases, when impediments were raised, during the impediment review event, they were told, that's not an impediment. Can't you sort that out yourselves? Reinforcing yet again the cultural fear to speak up. And finally, the transparency of the things that we saw, the impediments that were raised, they were stale on the board and they would sort of randomly disappear. So you can imagine the amount of trust that the people had who were raising the impediments with the help of their Scrum Masters, sending them into a black hole of, wow, that's really not going to work, so how invested and how trustful are we going to be in that situation? At the same time, we encountered some issues with the Scrum of Scrums. Now, in a lot of cases, the Scrum of Scrums, or ScrumAtScale, is one product and many teams working together to execute that product. In the case that we had at Toyota, specifically in their manufacturing plant, we had one team. There were many teams, but each team would have several small products or several customers that they would support at the same time. So the relationship was more of one team, many products to one product, many teams. This prevented the teams from logically getting together to work to solve the same problems as you would if you had combined organizational impediments. And none of the existing meetings disappeared because Scrum was the things that the teams were doing. We didn't change any of the organizational aspects because we hadn't gotten that far down the path yet. So what we decided to do was leverage their existing communication platforms. Instead of telling them, you need these new meetings called a Scrum of Scrum, and you need these new meetings called a Meta Scrum, we said, okay, what is it that you guys are using currently to talk about your project level impediments? And we identified this one event that they called the Wallchart meeting. This Wallchart meeting is where they got together and they, unfortunately, had a long-winded conversation in a disorganized manner over this project status report template, which was your standard status report template. It said, what were your accomplishments? What are your risks? What are you going to be working on? And so on and so on and so forth. The good news is we got them to A, get rid of the Gantt chart, and B, start using at least a release burn down for the time component of the puzzle. And one small victory we did have is we were able to communicate to the Scrum Masters and product owners that all of the information on your Scrum boards will feed directly into this stinking project template that you have to do. Now, this project template was on the age of decades of use, so changing it overnight was not something that was readily accepted by the management. But as Dr. Sutherland pointed out, we want small incremental steps. So the small incremental step that we got was getting them to use their existing information to fill this out. So instead of crystal ball gazing and making stuff up, we were at least using empirical data. That was victory number one. So if we take a look at this Wallchart meeting that we had, where everybody gets together and we're going to talk about it, and we figure out that this is being fed by an existing status report template that is at least supported by the empirical evidence from Scrum data. Let's see where it took them through the rest of their communication path, because we're leveraging their existing communication path. So what happened was, after the Wallchart meeting, it would be turned into an Excel spreadsheet and delivered to the next layer of management. So they had a national manager level here. They had the general manager here, and he would report it out to his business interests, his counterparts who were wondering, all these projects that you're working on for us, what is the status of all of those? That was the one-directional communication flow that we had. So we sat down with the Scrum Masters and we said, all right, we've got impediments that we need to talk about, and that needs to occur in your Scrum of Scrums. So let's break in half what we're doing with the two types of impediments that we're encountering. The Wallchart meeting is talking about project level impediments. If you guys work as a group of Scrum Masters in your Scrum of Scrums, that's already taken care of. We don't want to reinvent that wheel. Let's talk about organizational level of impediments that you guys experience as a group of Scrum Masters that your teams are encountering and you can help each other solve. And if you can't help each other solve them, then you can raise them up to this national manager level, who can then raise it up to the general manager level, and eventually it goes up to the executive action team. So we showed them where they actually were using their existing structures to do some impediment escalation, to participate in the Scrum Master loop, and we showed them how to build the other piece of the puzzle in so that they could meet regularly and help each other out. And then we built a Scrum Master loop for them on top of their existing communication platforms. On the other side, we asked them, what is it that you guys are doing to set direction and make sure that you're working on what is your highest priority? They had one event that was called the Investment Council, where all of these customers decided what it was that was the most valuable thing for the manufacturing group to be doing for them. And we said, all right, you meet there like once a month to review what you said was going to happen at the beginning of the annual plan. So we asked them, where do you go to find that you're still doing the right thing because market conditions change? And where do you go to find that you're still doing things right, that you're using the right technologies and the most current pieces of the puzzle? So we built on top of their single event 2 more events that filled in the product ownership loop. Now we show them the missing pieces of their puzzle from a ScrumAtScale perspective based on what they were already doing, and they were much more accepting of allowing us to recommend how to build in the missing pieces without calling them just this new thing that you need to do, but understand the reasoning behind it. So the final outcome was fundamentally breaking the impediment path into project level impediments, which they were good at, and organizational level impediments, which they weren't good at, got the Scrum Masters and the teams re-engaged because things were now being implemented in a way that they knew when and where they would be dealing with things. This is the picture that we ended up drawing at the end, so I'll make that available in the case study as well.
I noticed you said that the Scrum of Scrums met twice a week.
Yes.
Who decided that cadence?
They self-organized it.
Self-organized.
Yeah.
Do you feel that that cadence was sufficient, or should they have been having it more often?
In their case, it was sufficient because they weren't one product, many teams. They were more talking about organizational impediments that they would help each other out with, such as, we need to onboard somebody, what's the new onboarding procedure? Who knows how to do that this week as opposed to last week? Annie?
Did you set up new communications channels for the national manager, general manager, executive action team, or were those existing?
Right, so, yeah, no, good question. We had this executive action team at the highest level that existed. And they were the ones saying, how come nobody's sending us any issues? The national management level was the first level of fear to speak up, because things that were sent there were knocked back down. So there was a lot of independent coaching going on here. In fact, we removed some of the people from that impediment process because of their behavior. And once we kind of got disconnected, and we got the Scrum Masters coming to the national managers, not just with complaints, but with the responsibility to say, you need to understand and state the impact of the organizational impediments that you're bringing up so that they can be appropriately prioritized. That started connecting the dots. So these conversations already existed.